Yes, thank you, Julia. And I hope you are all keeping safe and well. And thank you for joining us today at this panel discussion that we have. So from physics, we move on to corporate purpose. There's a growing sense amongst business leaders that they should be able to articulate a shared understanding of why their organization exists and what the role of business within larger society should be. Corporate purpose is a way to express the organization's impact on stakeholders, given the rising importance of intangible assets and stakeholder support to businesses today. Airmic is embarking on a research project on corporate repurposing as part of our Roads to series of thought leadership reports, which started in 2011 with Roads to Ruin, followed by Roads to Resilience, and then Roads to Revolution 2 years ago. In this panel session today, we will discuss what corporate purpose is and what the role of risk professionals and business leaders is in developing business responsibility and reputation as organizations reset after COVID-19. I'm delighted to be joined today by three panelists who will unpack all of this for us, and I will introduce each of them before they speak. I will ask each of them to speak for 5 minutes in the first instance, and then we will have a panel discussion. We start with John Ludlow, who is CEO of Airmic. Previously, John has been a senior advisor in risk management and senior vice president of global risk management at the Intercontinental Hotels Group, IHG, where he established a successful track record in risk management leadership roles. John is a certified fellow of the Institute of Risk Management and has served as an IRM director and chair of the technical committee. And I think John will also share about how Airmic has come to look at the topic of repurposing. So John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ho-Young, and good morning, everybody. With so much change in our lives, it's really important to stand back and think about the purpose of our lives and our businesses, which is so much of our lives for most of us anyway. I think you need to ask, what sort of leader do you want to be? And also, what sort of business do you want to have? You need to work out what effect you want your life and your business to have on others. So when doing this, my perspective always starts with resilience, because I think there's no point in building something that isn't going to last. I often ask people, do you want to build a sandcastle or the Great Wall of China? And the answer always is, I want to build something that's going to last longer than me, that's going to be here for a long time. So I think we need to start by looking at what causes things to fail. And there's no better place to do that than to have a look at one of the early reports that Airmic did, our very own Road to Ruin. Most of you will remember this, at least those with any grey hair. So let's move on to the slide, please, Alex. And if I just want to, and the next one, please. So I just want to give you a sort of a little aide-memoire, please, on what Road to Ruin gave us. It was the lessons from a whole series of disasters that shocked the world. And rather than go into those, you can read the report. It's still on our website. I don't know how many treasured hard copies there are still knocking around, but it's there on the website for you. The key lessons out of there really were, you need to understand what your principal risks are. What are the things that could pose an existential threat to your firm? And then you need to ask yourselves, do we have the right sort of skills on the board? Do our NEDs in particular, do they all look to opportunity, or do we have some that know how to control a risk and the different types of risk, not just those static risks with firm controls in, sort of like some of the financial risks, but some of the more dynamic risks in the world. Do the board really know how that all works? The next piece there was, have we got a bunch of people that believe it's creeping paradise outside, and they really don't believe that these threats are ever going to happen, or if they are going to happen, they're going to happen somewhere else. So that's really board risk blindness. people who are just blindly optimistic. And then, of course, those with a slightly shorter memory will still remember people like Fred the Shred, poor leadership and ethos, poor culture, sort of just happy to drive through to the results they want, regardless of what happens elsewhere. And it was actually, a lot of it was about themselves. And we see some of that in politics today, don't we? So you've got poor leadership on ethos and culture. Do people really understand that? And then, of course, you move on, and even if you've got a great board, if they fail to communicate down, then how can you expect people to understand what you believe in and what you want done? So a lot of work was done on strategic implementation rather than just working out what the strategy was. You've got to communicate to everybody right down to the grassroots what you're trying to do and also how you want it done. And that's where the culture comes in. We then had the lessons from businesses that were excessively complex. And there's a difference between complexity and connected, but they are connected risks, but they are themselves connected, of course. And we have built quite a world, haven't we? It's very connected, but some of our businesses also got so complex that people, even on the board, didn't understand what was going on. And for that, I'd look to the banks. And I think that came out again, didn't it, in the financial banking disaster, where the board didn't really understand what their businesses were selling. And the next one there, the next lesson was risks arising from inappropriate incentives. And again, this goes back to, this is what we want to achieve. We'll pay people big bucks if they do it. We'll just ignore how they do it. And that's completely inappropriate, because you then have all your businesses aligned to delivering the what, not the how you want things doing. So your incentives need to address both the what and the how. And then the last big lesson that came out was one for our own community. It was the risk glass ceiling. It was the risk managers not being able to talk to the senior executives, not being able to talk to the board, not being given board time. There were no committees. The audit committee just looked at finance. There was no risk committees. So really the risk manager didn't get a look in. But also, equally for ourselves, were we really up to the job of talking to the board? Did we have the courage, the conviction, and the capability to do that? So there was a kind of there was no bad news going back up, and perhaps we were part of the problem. Next slide, please, Alex. So once we'd learnt the lessons of that, when I was looking after the technical committee at Airmic, we decided what we needed to do is not just say, those are all the problems. We actually needed to put together a report really trying to illustrate, good practice and what could be done to build resilience in a business. So we came out with our Roads to Resilience report, and I think there's still a few of these knocking around the office. So you may be able to get hold of one. There's not many left, but again, it's all online, and it's a really good guide, I think, to putting in the main pillars of resilience. It's building, looking at those strategic characteristics that enable a business to survive, but also to thrive in a global economy, because that's where I was. It was a very global economy. I think there was some great things in there. It was looking at the risk radar, knowing what's going on in your ecosystem and society, looking at the resources and assets in your business and how flexible you can make them. It was looking at your relationships and your networks, because, when on the day of the races, you need friends, and you need to understand who's on your side and who you can look to for support. We also looked at making sure you had a rapid response and you'd exercise that muscle so that you could respond to things as they happened. But lastly, we said you absolutely got to be able to review and adapt, because tomorrow is not the same as yesterday. In fact, I always used to talk about, if you're doing business the way you used to do it 3 years ago, you're probably doing it wrong. The reality is that time has got shorter and shorter, hasn't it, over time? So that was Roads to Resilience. Again, a ripping good yarn. I suggest if you haven't read it, you do. And actually, all three of these books so far are taught on the Business Excellence Programme that Airmic puts on. And then we did, I think it was a year or so ago, we did Roads to Revolution, because we recognised that actually we got the fourth industrial revolution well underway. It was the technology digitization of virtually everything, and that we needed to think about resilience in that age, and also think about it in terms of how you transform a business. So this idea that a risk manager actually is about part of the effort to transform and to drive change and facilitate change. So that was another great read, and that is absolutely on the web. I don't think there are even hard copies, because that would have been wrong, wouldn't it? There's the odd executive summary, but it's all digital. And now we think it's timely to look at repurposing. So Julia is asking Stephen Toff to write this one with us over the next year. And hopefully I'll be able to contribute some ideas to it, because I think repurposing is absolutely fundamental. In fact, I think everything starts with purpose. And to talk about purpose, it's the what you want to achieve in life as a business, who you want to affect positively, hopefully, and what the outcome is for those people. And in my old hotel company, it was great hotels, guests love. Great hotels is what we wanted to do. Guests is who we wanted to affect, and love of our hotels was the outcome we wanted for them. Very simple, great hotels, guests love, very catchy. Everybody got it. There were hundreds of thousands of people involved with different businesses in creating those brands, Holiday Inn, Intercontinental and the like. And you have to align everybody behind an idea, because what you don't want is owners building cheap hotels. Yeah, you don't want hotel operators taking the light bulbs out to save electricity. We all have to align behind great hotels that guests love. And sometimes that means making sacrifices on other needs that we have or other desires that we have. Our primary focus has to be those hotel guests and getting them to love our brands. So that's why purpose is so important. It's about getting everybody in the whole ecosystem to align behind an idea and to motivate them. Very quickly, though, to be sustainable, I think you've got to be responsible. So after you've clarified your purpose, you've got to move on to your values and behaviors. And Aristotle, Plato set down the values, but the virtues came later, and the behaviors are up to each individual company to say, these are the behaviors we actually want to exhibit as we go about our business. And that can be different for every single brand, even within an industry. And that takes us on really to reputation. Reputation, most people think about the corporate brands, product brands. Well, that's usually the products, the services, the sort of innovation. Think about some innovative companies that we all love, and that's the sort of the surface side of it. The underbelly of a brand is about governance. It's about citizenship. It's about what a good place to work it is. And all of those drivers produce you a reputation. And businesses today need to understand all of that. And if you do, I honestly think you'll get resilience and success, and you'll have the right sort of outcomes that your stakeholders want to see. So with that, let's just move on to the next slide, Alex, the sort of last slide there. So my sort of, the next slide, please. Yeah, the next slide is really my parting words, which is change is a constant in our lives, and that's a lesson that I've embraced all my life. You've got to embrace change. Don't be afraid of it, risk managers, and for heaven's sake, never waste a crisis. Crises are times when the world wobbles, and it's a great chance to change an organization, change its culture, change its processes. Change its people's capabilities. So it's a great time. So we also heard from Grant earlier on about escape velocity. Well, I think we invest to drive a business forward. You can invest for efficiency, efficacy, making sure it all works. You can invest to beat your competition, advantage, yeah. But you can also invest for differentiation and growth. And really to make a difference and to make a step change, you've got to do that. And when you do invest, please invest with your other stakeholders. Do it as a collective. Do it together. because if you don't, you'll get unintended consequences. And also, of course, in the Industrial Revolution, in Fourth Industrial Revolution, you must use technology, but don't see technology as a panacea. See it as an enabler for your people. People are going to make the difference. Technology enables them to make the difference. So the sort of last lesson there really, I guess, is get more strategic. Cut away what isn't absolutely essential for your journey. Invest in what matters most and what's going to make the difference, but put your people first. Invest in your people. They're going to need new skills. They need to be helped through the pandemic, the lockdown and all of that. So don't just think technology is the answer. The one last thought I would give you is the watchwords I always had close to me when I was driving change. And I've driven change most of my life. And that is, I looked around me and I asked my people questions and to try and understand, did we have focus as a team? Were we cohesive as a team? Did we have a simplicity of understanding of what we're trying to achieve? Did we have pace? And did we all understand the greatness of the vision that we're trying to deliver for our stakeholders? So it's focus, cohesion, simplicity, pace, and greatness. And those words actually came from a huge survey that the Telegraph did about 20 years ago from the top 1,000 entrepreneurs in the UK. I've kept them by my side all these years, and I think they've served me well. Thank you. Back to you, Ho-Young.
Thank you very much, John. We now turn to Steve. Stephen Toff is a writer and business consultant with 25 years of experience of managing change in organizations. Before starting his own business, he worked in the OD consulting practice of PricewaterhouseCoopers. His blog about employment and the labour market won the Editorial Intelligence Independent Blogger Award in 2013. He has written for The Guardian, The New Statesman, and Prospect, and has been featured on People Management's list of the top 20 social media influencers. Steve is, of course, the researcher and writer with whom Airmic is working on the Roads to Repurposing Thought Leadership project, as John had pointed out earlier. So, Steve, how did the concept of corporate purpose as we know it begin?
Well, morning, everybody, and thank you, Ho-Young, for that great introduction. It's interesting to look at the development of the idea of corporate purpose. It's something that's come up the agenda in the past, I say the past decade or so, but if you look at the roots of it, people's attitude to organizations and corporations has been shifting for some time. If you go back to the 1990s, we had a number of corporate failures, but the 1990s was all about shareholder value. So the answer to the corporate failures was to bring in corporate governance systems that would look after the interests of shareholders. So we had the introduction of non-executive directors and the corporate governance reforms of the 90s. Get into the 2000s and we're starting to talk about stakeholder capitalism. So we've now got this idea of enlightened shareholder value, and we have lots more stakeholders in, so customers, suppliers, the community that you're in, the wider society, this idea that corporations have responsibilities. Then we get the financial crisis, and people say, well, all these corporate governance reforms, all this about enlightened shareholder value and stakeholder capitalism, well, that didn't really help much, did it? Because as John said, we still got some excessive behaviour, and it had a massive impact on the wider economy. And then you go into the 2010s and we get the idea of shareholder stewardship. So now we're saying it's not just the directors of a company that have responsibilities, it's also the investors. The investors have a joint responsibility with the directors for ensuring that people in organizations behave. And so now you arrive at this idea of corporate purpose, where we have a raison d'etre. So it's almost now as if people are saying to companies, well, tell us why you exist. Tell us why you have the right to exist. What is it that means you are actually good for us and good for the community rather than just good for your shareholders. So I think there's a much higher level of scrutiny on companies now than there was even 10 years ago, and certainly than there was 20 years ago. I was talking to an executive from a food company, an international food company, and he said years ago, as a senior executive in this company, you might get profiled in the trade press every now and again. Nowadays, they want you on breakfast TV to talk about obesity. So companies are far more in the spotlight now, and the expectations of company leaders are much greater. Public and employees expect to see more visible leaders. People are asking questions now when they join companies. What is your corporate purpose? What are you about? What kind of organization am I joining here? And it is now a lot more important to people than it was, say 20 years ago.
Yep. Thanks so much, Steve. We now turn to our final speaker, Dr. Richard Thomas. He has held a number of leadership and management roles in the public, third, and higher education sectors. He was awarded his doctorate by Ashton University in 2019 for his research into strategic decision-making in the portfolio risk management within the Royal Navy whilst he was a senior naval officer. Richard currently combines his practitioner academic perspective through his external lecturing at the Said Business School at the University of Oxford and the consultancy firm Risk Talk. So, Richard, why are you interested in corporate purpose, and what can we all do about it?
Thank you. I would just like to touch on what Oxford's doing, and then broaden it into the risk debate, if I may. So the Friedman Doctrine has that the purpose of business is profit. And I think we would all agree now there's a groundswell of opinion that's outdated and out of kilter with the values of society. So for an organization, that means their employees and also their customers. The demographic of 18 to 26-year-olds now reported having success in business, for them meaning that they can have a positive impact on others and society. And as we know, social media has an ability for consumers to influence an organization's reputation. So therefore, the contention is that it's trustworthy companies that will be successful. And to achieve that, firms need to have that nexus of relationships, of trust. That's their employees through the whole supply chain, which needs to be held up by their board of directors. So if we accept that regulation won't prevent the next crisis, be that financial crash or other, there is a school of thought that corporate governance should shift to ensuring that a company upholds its purpose. To achieve that, there would be a purpose statement in its annual report or its mission statement, identifying the type of problems it's looking to solve and ensuring that it doesn't add other problems into the mix in doing so, and then producing useful products that are underpinned by the values and culture of that organisation. To achieve that, there would need to be some significant policy changes through governments, and given the context we are in now of COVID, and let's not forget Brexit is also until recently high up on the agenda, how much bandwidth there is for this imminently, but we do need judicial policies, so the law to change on directors' responsibility. Regulation would have to look to align private purpose to societal needs, and indeed the ownership of organisations and companies would have to shift from purely a shareholder focus to a more sense of stewardship, as Stephen said. All this would mean that we would change from financial capital focus to looking at the society and environmental. And that could give purpose-centric organisations. And what would that mean? They would create profitable solutions, where the focus then is on the solutions and not just the profit. They would be mapping their broader stakeholders and not just their shareholders to look at the wider implications of what their business is about. Measurements would be debated about their financial and non-financial performance, and the whole internal organisation of their management accounts, profit measures, and employees' motivations would have to be aligned to their purpose. And business schools, such as Said, have a role in helping that come about. In Oxford today, there's a few work streams under the banner of responsible business. Ownership, looking at the role of owners in defining the way that the corporations behave and construe their purpose, the advantages of the long-term view and the avoidance of short-termism. There's an economics of mutuality lab. How does purpose drive strategy? Ecosystems, picking up on one of Grant Foster's phrases, I think it was in the second law of physics, where there would be holistic value creation for the ecosystem of the supply chain at the business level. There's an Oxford initiative on rethinking performance. How does purpose and performance at the board level get debated? How does the performance management system cascade down? And how do investment decisions, knowledge come up? All this is done in collaboration with others, and the British Academy is very closely involved with their work on the future corporation and the work on the policy changes required for business to reform to meet society's environment's challenges, taking advantage of technology. So, turning finally then to purpose and the implications for risk. If purpose can be driving strategy and the company can align its values and culture, then we still need to achieve our feedback on progress. There is a truism that what gets measured gets managed, and we know that your manager's interest in certain facts and figures will distort the underlying activity in those that they line manage and the motivations of their employees. In terms of risks, we need to be able to see the woods for the trees. We need knowledge, not just data. And we need confidence that new risks, novel risks, by which ones I mean they're so remote that we couldn't even imagine them, will be spotted and enacted. Just this month, the Harvard Business Review had an article on this. Kaplan, Leonard and Mike's authors, for those that wish to search it out, talking about how can we react and be confident of catching these novel risks. And their contention is to be alert for anomalies. What has changed? What is unusual? Technology has a role for this, and the consultancy firm I'm involved with, Risk Talk, has that enabler that John referred to help the workforce give voice to their concerns. But it is, I would contend, a leadership and management role to set the purpose, to set the culture where the right conversations can happen, that people are clear on what are the values that are important to success of the organisation, and so flag up the right concerns. Technology can help us, but we need to be able to mobilise the right response teams in a timely manner to change the risks into issues that we are dealing with effectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That is the time we have today for this panel, I'm afraid, but obviously the conversations will continue after this. So please join me in thanking our three panelists for sharing their thoughts and insights. Coming up next, we have a series of 3 keynotes on the theme of resilience. And without further ado, I will hand over to James Krask, Head of Resilience Consulting at Marsh. So James, please.